Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Whitney. Welcome to Whiteness, Dissonance, and Horror, presented by Cassandra Press on the occasion of their inclusion in the Whitney Biennial 2022, Quiet as It's Kept. My name is Megan Hoyer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Public Engagement here at the Whitney. For those of us joining us virtually, I want to let you know you can access closed captioning by turning on this feature in the options bar in Zoom. And thank you to Kara from SignNexus for providing the captioning today. I want to acknowledge that here at the Whitney, we are on the lands of the Lenape people. As a result of centuries of colonialism, today the Lenape are dispersed throughout the US and Canada. I should say what is today known as the US and Canada. Alongside the Lenape, many other indigenous nations have ancestral ties to this place now known as New York, including the 6 Haudenosaunee nations, Seneca, Cayuga, Tuscarora, Mohawk, Oneida, and Onondaga, and the Shinnecock and Puspatuk. If you are joining us online, please take a moment to recognize the indigenous people who have always and continue to steward the land from where you're joining us. Hopefully, you have all had a chance to spend time with the installation by Cassandra Press, or that you will soon, that's just outside of our theater here at the Whitney. Cassandra Press is an artist-run publishing and educational platform which produces lo-fi printed matter, classrooms, projects, and artist books and exhibitions. Our program today aims to share the work of Cassandra Classrooms, an ongoing pedagogical practice that spreads ideas, distributes new language, and propagates dialogue centering ethics, aesthetics, femme-driven activism, and Black scholarship. Cassandra Press was founded by Candice Williams, and we're thrilled to have Candice here to present the first of what will actually be 2 lectures today. And you're all welcome to stay for the second lecture, which starts at 4. Alongside her work with Cassandra Press, Candice is a visual artist whose practice spans collage, sculpture, film, performance, writing, publishing, and curating. She explores and deconstructs critical theory around race, nationalism, authority, and eroticism. And her work examines the body as a site of experience while drawing upon her background in dramaturgy to envision spaces that accommodate the varied biopolitical economies which inform how form and movement might be read. Williams establishes indices that network parts of the anatomy regions of Black diaspora, as well as communication and obfuscation, relaying how popular culture and myth are interconnected. So for this lecture, Candice is going to speak for, I don't know, maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours, and we had a 2-hour session, but we were talking before about she's very willing to take questions from the audience at the end. So she'll let you know when she's ready to do that. If you're joining us online, you can add your questions to the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll get them to her. And if you're in the room, we'll have a mic. One final note for those here in person, restrooms are located outside of the theater on this floor. If you need to exit for any reason during the program, please use the doors at the back of the room where you entered. Without further ado, please welcome Candice Williams.
Hello. Thanks everybody for coming in person, and for everybody who's joining online, welcome. I really encourage everybody to stay from Manuel Arturo Abreu's Zombie Politic. I'm going to stay for it. I think it's going to be a really interesting lecture as well. I've seen the slideshow. It's very succinct. Mine is not. So I'm going to really meander through the 3 words presented in the title of the course. And in doing this course, I'm kind of condensing for the lecture right now. We're trying to fit it all into like 90 minutes. Was pretty difficult. So it's an 8-week course when I teach it, and the course started in 2020. Each session is about 3 hours, so we try to, really kind of get a lot of discussion going and go into the materials, go into the screenings. It has like a very extensive screening list. The reader is outside and it's available online. And I suggest buying both versions of this one because the PDF has hyperlinks to all of the screenings, and the physical copy has the text that are read. So I'm going to bounce around kind of wildly through all of the different things that we go over in the course. But I will start with this image. Okay, so this image is from Poltergeist. This movie is oh, and I haven't put my little dates and times up. Oh, shoot. Is there no Wi-Fi here, actually, Megan? Yeah. Sorry. I'm like, pause the Zoom. I'm starting with this image, I think because it very much, or this movie also, it very much sort of sums up or helps me think through. I'm going to go ahead and just say I think it's 1982, this Poltergeist, maybe 78, but I'll find the date. I think the reason why I started teaching this class and started putting together this curriculum in the early part of 2020, summer of 2020, was really in response to a lot of the things that I think were happening from 2016 until now, in terms of the accumulation of a very intensely saturated, but also like strangely weaponizable and effective Black chattering class online. So the presence of multiple Black communities speaking simultaneously about especially political issues happening that were dominating the political field and popular attention, I think was very singular. Thank you. And sort of mounting since the election of Donald Trump, and especially innovations of Web 2.0. And so I think there was like a boiling point with George Floyd's murder in 2020, where I think sitting especially alone, because it was the middle of the pandemic often, and being very afraid, being very physically afraid, and then having that physical fear come in waves that were both shocking and then also, reaffirmed by historical narratives, but being also reaffirmed, by my peers, was a moment of really going back, I think for me personally, into my interest in horror movies as a teenager and as a kid growing up in Baltimore. So growing up in Baltimore, there was definitely a lot of violence happening around that was hyper-seen, hyper-visible, but very little explained. And I think that set a tone in me and a curiosity in me for forms of art that are kind of one-to-one, explicitly exploring that violence and the viscera, the trauma of possessing a human body. And I think there was always a way in which the love I had for horror films had to revolve around things like composition, cinematic elements, because character-wise, a lot of those elements of narrative were really, and I think this goes for a lot of Black audiences, singularly unavailable, right? A lot of the ways that characters are constructed in horror movies aren't available to people who go through daily trauma, have microaggressions, or descendants of collective groups who have suffered historical trauma. Because for us, it's a residue of that terror and terrorism that we experience daily that can't be fictionalized, right? That can't be fantasticized or made fantastic. And so 2020, that summer, was really a summer of sitting with, my own personal kind of like reservoir of slasher films, hardcore films, gore, and the fantasies of those and the characters that didn't align, and also seeing this kind of a new dimension of the popular kind of like vernacular use of white and whiteness, and the strangeness of the way whiteness kind of was developing as a popular point of discussion. I will say that I think, Poltergeist, especially this film, or this scene in particular, does stand in for a lot of those anxieties around that Black chattering class and the class of people who are observing the white nuclear family. And it brought again this movie brought again up so many things in 2020 for me around especially white fear, white rage, white guilt, and how the expression of that is so often hyper aestheticized. And it's a kind of one-to-one pipeline, right, from like where you see and this was also a very 2020 phenomenon, but I think then we saw, our political anxieties being funneled directly into Netflix content, and a means of production and a mode of also like the distribution of those anxieties that used film and that used especially, let's say filmic material to really bolster a lot of the thought regimes that were happening in real time. So I'll probably move on to another slide. I think this also, thinking about this today, this is a long slide. I'll leave this up for a while, but this is from writer Dylan Rodriguez from an article called Inhabiting the Impasse. And it's on basically the recognition of genocide and understanding sort of the recognition of genocide in all of its forms, but also in a couple things that I really anchor a lot of the whiteness, dissonance, and horror class around this essay for a lot of reasons, but I'll call your attention now to like kind of further down in the quote where he says, here I'm engaging Fanon's refusal to genuflect to the white supremacist sanctity of the dominant genocide narrative, reframing as a white European family quarrel. I'm especially attentive to his elaborations of the peculiar logics of humiliation, degradation, terror, and death to which black being is subjected to, in excess of its physiological destruction. To be hunted down, exterminated, cremated is the consistent social condition of black life in modern Western social formations, and for Fanon, these forms of visceral attack compose nothing more than the latter stages of an exterminating logic of violence that both precedes the physical act of brutalization and killing and provides assurance and coherence of the historical spectacle of the Nazi-conducted white Jewish Holocaust. So thinking through this sort of 2020, I think until today, right, like this is very much seen, I think, in a lot of the coverage of the Africans and people of color and disabled people who are caught behind the lines of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. But the idea that whiteness, I think, also offers up, and this is a Fanonian kind of concept, a black body that can be constantly hunted down, constantly exhumed, and then re-brutalized, right? It also creates a white body that is doubled, right? It creates a white body that's always mother, daughter, father, son, right? A white nuclear family that doubles as one white collective body. So I want to think here about this European family quarrel and the idea of genocidal narratives being framed as white-on-white conflict, that white-on-white crime. So white fear, and the thinking through this, right? Like a lot of the kind of like inversion of the, or not even inversion, but a lot of the impetus and intention behind hunting down, demolishing of this logic of evisceration, right? That Rodriguez talks about a lot in this essay. Becomes boistered and shouldered and supported by white fear. So the fear of becoming or rendered invisible, the fear of being also exterminated, the fear of being rendered statistics, the fear of being essentially terrorized in the same way that they produce terror is a way that white narratives around genocide and narrativization, I would sort of theorize in general, happen. White fear is somehow always visible, right? And it's visible in its so many ways, I think, thinking through, moments like this of, I forget this woman's name, but this white woman in Central Park that we know used another term that we're thinking of now, or a new term, I think, white women's tears, to make visible her distress, right? But the dissonance there, the identity, right? To have an identity, and this is to go to another part of the Rodriguez essay, but to have an identity in which you have an epidermal power. So you have a power in just purely the solidification, the solid presentation of your whole skin, right? This goes all the way to sort of like classical Greek forms, but the white whole body, unbroken, unfractured, pure, virtuous, right? We double all of these, and here Rodriguez, and I think this is a beautiful thing to think about through and how we sort of create color vacuums, colorist vacuums, right? Ableist vacuums, but the idea of a white being is a being that exercises a kind of epidermalized power. There isn't just one way of being white, Dylan says. We cannot overemphasize enough that white being cannot be conflated with, quote, white people. I would challenge him a little bit there, but I do think that actually white folk can be conflated with white folk. undoubtedly, Fanon is still correct in stressing the epidermalized physiological activated structure of power that inheres in white bodies. However, white bodies are socio-politically formed and institutionalized in a given moment. We can go back to homegirl here, who's very much epidermalizing, right, her power. She's using her identity, her appearance, what she knows she even sounds like, right, to constitute another layer of dominance, right, to vehicularize a layer of dominance. Going in and out of the quote here. And yet there is another method to humiliate and degrade, perhaps even to dehumanize the underside peoples, as I'm referencing. So finally, we have to admit to ourselves that the most important struggles are against the desire to coalesce with white being, both in the sense of political affinity and the conception of good living. It doesn't make sense to funnel all manner of insurgent activities, art, organizing, protests, underground political work into the demands of this particular global racial order, that peoples targeted by white being now and forever be enfolded into white being, whether by virtue of right, citizenship, marriage, or something else. Those demands may be momentarily necessary and vital for the sake of resisting state violence, but have been demonstrated over and over again to work in the longer historical span in the service of white being and no other being. This last part of this quote I'm going to kind of come back to when we talk about henchmen in the films. But you know, one of the hard parts about this class is that it's being kind of constantly updated. So I think in this section, oh yeah, I'll tell you the sort of sections too. In this section, we're going to deal with really how white identity has been constructed for the last 6 to 8 years, that epidermalized power. But it's almost like, it's just sort of scary. It is actually a bit scary with this class in terms of like a physiological response to that epidermalized power as we see the rise of fascism and as we see a violent rhetorical a use of violent rhetorical fallacy to produce a total lack of accountability and really reassure social policies that are steeped in white supremacy and rationalize predation, rationalize war, rationalize killers, rationalize serial killers, rationalize all forms of predation, and also glamorize those forms of predation. These are images from the streets of 2020. So what I think was really interesting, and this is also going back to Katanji, these things are happening in real time, right? So there's a really funny kind of like occurrence from 2016 to now, where whiteness produces itself through doubling, right? Through that collective body. So one white person, one white being, the white being is actually not really masked. It's not gendered. It's not child or adult, right? It's able to slip between all of those spectrums of sort of being in order to escape accountability for one identity or another. So whiteness as an epidermalized power creates, you know, movies like The Winter Soldier, right? Like creates complex covens of witches, or in Twilight movies, you know, it creates also serial killers who go unfound, right, because they are considered unseeable by law enforcement. So this doubling, right, this like, we are every man, woman, and child. We are the only women, men, and children, right? We are the only beings who deserve to control in totality their environment, the lives of others, and our own destinies. This is the creation of whiteness, and this, especially in this moment now, I think, be really wary when you're watching media, because this is exactly, I think, the rhetorical tools that white supremacist media use to both escape historical accountability, right, for traumas inflicted exactly the same way, past, present, and future, to isolate intention, so that intention seems so nuanced, as though it can only be, you know, happen very sporadically, right? And think about all of the laws and policies that get cops off for killing people without training, without, you know. And then also it counters, I'll talk to you like a little bit about the class that I'm going to start teaching, which is Blackness, Dissonance, and Terror, right? Where it's like the people, the others of these communities, people who have non-white bodies, who have decentralized or unpowered, or I don't know how to say that, oppressed, I guess, are oppressed by the epidermis or by the skin, have to also project a lot of these narratives, right? Because the dissonance that allows us to deal with regimes of terror, right, that constantly erase our humanity, is also found in a lot of these mythological kind of narrative structures, genocidal narratives. I'm going to call horror from now on a genocidal narrative structure. Horror movies, horror films. These are from, real life. But just thinking through, especially the way that that doubling happens, right? So one being, one white being, all white beings, and how does this doubling of all these intersections produce? What does this doubling of all these intersections produce? Well, it produces like a pretty extreme evacuation of accountability for individuals, for white individuals, right, who have access to means of social reproduction or control. So thinking about Weinstein, right, this is one abusive predator who also is in control of narrative production itself, right, predominantly for most of us who are sitting in this room who are alive have been influenced by the narratives that this man has been able to produce, distribute, and in many ways edit before we even see. And so we also see a structure, a system around this identity, right, where the domination and control, the connoisseurship, the collection of others linked to socioeconomic control that started during the colonial period is only exacerbated by aesthetic regimes or like scopic regimes. Does that make sense? It's going to make sense. But that there are people like Weinstein, right? We'll get to this at the end of the lecture too, but that white masculine identity often doubles as not just a leader, a father, but the wild child, the wild child, the beast, the welcoming mother, the whore, the Madonna, there's all this sort of evolution of these intersections, but essentially they also produce the rhetorical device and the narrative devices necessary to never be accountable for the actual political implications of their material identities, i.e. being landowners, people owners, torturers, predators, the list goes on, right? And we'll go into like even thinking, well, maybe I'll skip ahead a little bit into, yeah. So this doubling, right, the white man's burden, this doubling produces this litany of straw men that are literary fictional characters of note, right? Most literary fictional characters of note will have some sort of process of this sort of doubling. But in the white man's burden, we see that for especially whiteness produces not only the poetic doubling, but it also produces the means of abuse, the structures of violence, the system of the logic of evisceration, right? And then doubles devil child, servant master, doubles judge convict, doubles exile and captive. So there's a constant, from the birth, and this poem is from 1899, so from the birth of the colonial, throughout the colonial, we have poetic devices and especially auteurs, right? Norman Mailer, here's another one. Auteurs who suggest that within the capacity for raining terror, essentially, upon others, there is also the burden, right, of that power. So thinking through, everyone from Ted Bundy to Dexter, right? The White Negro, this is from 1972. This is those wartime soldiers who return as killers from Vietnam, that generation that also is, extremely important to our aesthetic auteurs of now. Mailer writes the unstated essence of hip, and hip here, I think, also being important to the distribution of avant-garde, from avant-garde to popular culture. Hip is almost like that gateway, right? And I think we don't conceive of the author of this term often as like this person, but Norman Mailer and the White Negro wrote, he essentially defined hip as a kind of psychopathy. So the unstated essence of hip, its psychopathic brilliance quivers with the knowledge of new kinds of victories, increases one's power for new kinds of perception, and defeats the wrong kinds of defeats, attack the body and imprison one's energy until one is jailed in the prisoner air of other people's habits, other people's defeats, boredom, quiet desperation, and multi-iced self-destroying rage. Now this, essay, when I first read this essay, I was also struck with my own dissonance, because as a Black person, especially as a Black femme, I think I give, we won't even say the benefit of the doubt, we'll say like I read with the veil on, you know? So most of like rhetoricians, especially theorists from especially this period who are white masculine men, you have to kind of we take for granted, right, how much we understand that they are probably social predators. We've almost come up with frequently asked questions list of ways that we can disregard white male accountability for their actual selves, right? And instead value their work or what they've produced. I'm in this course thinking about how we can do both, like how we can say that a lot of cinematic innovations are around the white masculine will to interpret violence that they are capable of, and that they understand themselves as a collective to be capable of as a means of personal interpretation, right? So a lot of these innovations from Mies, and this goes from Mies van der Rohe to Mailer, a lot of the innovations of white masculine genius, right, are in their ability to translate violence a lot of the time into what they actually kind of like judge, jury, executioner, right, qualify as beauty. So Mailer in this essay goes on to say, essentially after being like, you know, post-Holocaust, post-nuclear bomb, we understand as white men, he doesn't make that explicit, he, you know, doubles the white man for every man, but he says we understand that we can be killed at will, right? Something that people of color, that colonialized bodies, that indigenous bodies have understood at this point, 1972, for centuries. But Mailer's saying now we can understand by 72 that, you know, we could die at any minute from a deus ex machina, as he calls it, but what I would say is just state-sanctioned violence, and become essentially, you know, left to the same fate as the Negro. And he says this really explicitly, right? So he says like white men and white people and the world, right? The white everyman post the nuclear bomb has to understand psychopathy and a means of recognizing and reconciling the fact that we live in a world that could render us as statistics, right? And so he says specifically, the hipster is the person who is aware of that and is using Black people and Black codes, and he even says, this is really fucked up, but the existentialist synapses of the Negro in order to exploit that new unawareness of the mortality and fragility of our interconnected collective bodies, right? So I want to read this actually again out loud. So there's a new breed of adventurers, urban adventurers who drifted out at night looking for action with a Black man's code to fit their facts. The hipster had absorbed the existentialist synapses of the Negro, and for practical purposes could be considered a white Negro. This is one of, you know, kind of like groundwork text for white integrationists, right? This is like where white primitivists, especially of this era, and this is not just Mailer, right? These are the African mass collectors of the 40s. These are, you know, the people doing sound salons from colonialists, field recordings of the 20s. So this is the new version, right, of that white man's burden. How do we take up the white man's burden? Well, extend that half devil, half child into now, you know, puppet, right, for this new kind of dualism, this new kind of duality where you are a white Negro. You can be a white Negro. I'll flash forward and I won't dwell on it, but, you know, we have terms now like blackfishing. We see like, you know, out there in the Cassandra exhibition, we see a lot of the ways in which Mailer is starting to sort of recognize the way social currency is actually impacting the policies around identity, right? Like the social currency of jazz, the social currency of especially like resistance that's happening in Black civil rights sectors from the 50s until now. This is what he's talking about, right? This is what he's talking about appropriating. It may be fruitful to consider the hipster a philosophical psychopath, a man interested not only in the dangerous imperatives of his psychopathy, but in codifying, at least for himself, the suppositions on which his inner universe is constructed. By this premise, the hipster is a psychopath and yet not a psychopath, but the negotiation of the psychopath, for he possesses the narcissistic detachment of the philosopher, that absorption in the recessive nuances of one's own motive, which is so alien to the unreasoning drive of the psychopath. If this is one of the most dissonant statements, right, ever committed to paper. So a lot of the time, you know, like, and this is, I think Erica Hart, somebody I follow on Instagram said, you know, whiteness confuses, right? And a lot of the ways that white identity emerged, I think, from 2016 to now, shored up, right, by these, and I like to think of them as white confessionals, like the confessioners, like Mailer, even like Joan Didion, like Rachel Cusk. There are these kind of like white writers who definitely kind of show themselves, right? But again, we have doubling for essentially psychopath and victim of technology, right? We have also internalized struggle, this struggle for a kind of internalized detachment and hyper-engagement. Hyper-engagement meaning psychopathy, right? You're actually going to hurt people. And again, this is sort of the birth, I think, of that not just the hipster, but I think the hipster as we know them today contains like the devil's advocate. I know we've probably all, any black person who's been, predominantly in white spaces has heard this term and understands how it's been used to veil the accountability of people who have, good intentions, but want to still argue, right, for like the maintaining the sort of commonplace or the lowest common denominator sort of instinct. That was me drifting into a personal experience, but the devil's advocate, I'm going to start thinking about dissonance now. But I lost myself in the notes. Evolution of the serial killer, online capture. Devil's advocate. So thinking through also whiteness as a means of both rationalizing and becoming unaccountable and sort of also de-rationalizing, right? The logic of evisceration is not one of rationalization. And I think even thinking through greater white Western ontology, right? Like the rational has never been the rational, right? The rational has always produced science, like epistemes, knowledge regimes that act against life. Whiteness also doubles, right, in its evolution from serial killer to online capture to director to whatever sort of connoisseur. As it inherits the fear, it inherits sort of fear to double. It inherits fear of doubling, and it inherits the ability to double, and it essentially kind of creates this this constant viewer that constantly is constantly assessing risk, right? So whiteness and risk assessment goes back to, I think we can look at Cheryl Harris, Whiteness is Property, but policies, especially around insurance, around the movement of cargo, the movement of transporting people, people, things, objects, goods, produced, right? So like the mid-Atlantic slave trade really produced a lot of our means of assessing risk and value of like not just objects but people. And so this is like where we kind of go into the henchman. This idea that a dissonance that's created around all the aspects of the realization of material worth, I guess. I mean, that kind of like leads us into like thinking through fetishism. This is Norman Mailer actually, I mean, yeah. Just like this dude, I mean, yeah, there's, like, we go into it a lot more in the class, but like, like how this man was cited as like a cultural critic and thinker for so long was really, it's just beyond me. But that generation, I think, is also has, that generation that's coming back from Vietnam has a lot of particularly, like I said, a lot of particularly interesting dissonance. It's also a horror golden age, right? Like, horror movie golden age from the 20s, 30s, 50s to 70s, 80s, 90s. Like it's like these golden ages of horror really, post-Vietnam, it's like horror becomes one of the most popular genre forms because there's documentation, right? So this is a still from a documentary called The Winter Soldier. So it was produced by a group of Vietnam War veterans coming back from Vietnam who actually held a tribunal to process together, but also to admit and be held accountable in their own symbolic way, right, for crimes against humanity. So they sat together and discussed what they did in Vietnam, and with each other, and with a small film crew. Interestingly enough, that a lot of the interest in dissonance, I think, comes from seeing this film so many years ago. But the idea of the soldier having just the state-sanctioned authority to kill, right, the authority to kill the other, and having that absolve them, the idea or the notion that we live under that absolves people from guilt, right, or that absolves people from accountability or consequence for harming others is really challenged by this documentary, because what you see here is like a swath of men who are, you know, white, black, indigenous, Asian, from the American, who are in real time talking about what it is to be a murderer, right? To be not just a murderer, but to willfully murder and traumatize, torture, and abuse others. And to have that not just be an option, right, but a mission. And what's interesting is, and also hearing there's kind of like their issues with reintegration, right? What this, I think, documentary makes really clear is that we have a culture post-Vietnam that is full of murderers, right? Men who are like not able to process extreme brutality. Torture almost for fun's sake, right? We have a people of, we have so little protocol around how to treat wounded and prisoners of war. We have films that are, again, that white mask kind of like necro-imaginary pipeline, political pipeline to fantasy. We have films that are, you know, immediately doubling these heroes' narratives, from Apocalypse Now to Full Metal Jacket, you know, like within less than 10 years of the conflict ending, we have these glorifications of Vietnam, right, without any kind of like mass understanding of what it means to have a killer at home, right, or a killer incorporated into your home. We kind of did this. But this is also the age of serial killers, right? We see like a wave of especially, you know, strategic, not strategic, but whatever, sort of trained, tactically trained at least, white men coming back from war with urges and desires. This is something that also was talked about by, you know, the wives of Nazi officers after World War II, right? With nowhere to channel that energy anymore. And Bundy didn't even go to Vietnam, so this is like this is a cultural trend, right? It's from Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. He began with the argument that we whites, from the point of development we had arrived at, must necessarily appear to them the savages and the nature of supernatural beings. We approach them with the might of a deity, and so on and so on. By the simplest exercise of our will, we can exert a power for good practically unbounded. So the power for good, but also this overwhelming power for evil, right? This is another doubling that creates white identity. The perception of being seen as a god, and being entitled to not just the control, right, but the judgment of others, the ability to execute. These are, I mean, in the course we talk about this from, you know, Christianity and the crucified road to the Unabomber, but this Jekyll and Hyde, right, this whiteness as a double presence, is very much, you know, kind of a part of that construction. So the real monsters becoming white dads, the real, like, kind of violence being this ability to control and dominate not just the image, right, not just the material world, but also the epistemes that connect them. This is from, and also the environment, the greater environment. Being able to traffic in bodies as both aesthetic and material. From, you know, we're going to talk a little bit more about primitivism, Picasso to Cubism, the creation of monsters and heroes. So, yeah, I'll read this actually out loud. High-minded people, liberal or just soft-hearted, protest that they were shocked by such inconsistencies, that they were either mistaken or dishonest with us, for there is nothing more consistent than a racist humanism, since the European has only been able to become a man through creating slaves and monsters. So this is also Rayvon Fauché, you know, thinking about these. M. Night Shyamalan describes The Happening from 2008 as a love story, very strangely enough. But these echoes, right, in a lot of the horror movies of real genocidal politics, of global politics that are happening, I think is another aspect of whiteness that we'll get into. Or just a big aspect of why I think whiteness and horror genres especially is a really interesting expression of the social construction of whiteness, right? Like in real time, social whiteness is happening like at the same time as historical event, and those events are able to be like disseminated and distributed into these narratives, I think, pretty one-to-one, right? Monsters, heroes. That question of whether or not the monster is us or is just like us is also something that we touch on in the course. The white nuclear family, again, producing like not just doubles, but common quadruples of intersections of the interchangeability of the white being. The white being can be mother, father, son, daughter. The white being can also be killer, victim, devil, child, right? Like there's a narrative 360 that is, and explicitly, we'll kind of think through this a little bit, but that's explicitly not available to anyone without that epidermal power, right? That is, are we like the monsters or are we the monsters? I think is a constant kind of like anxiety built from that doubling that white people are also genuinely expressing like, pretty consistently throughout horror films, especially those golden 70s. This is from Last House on the Left by Wes Craven. The last one was from The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. This fear of doubling as both, trafficker of bodies and victim to the potential trafficking, right, of bodies. I think we've been seeing since 2016 a lot of these white men who are able to who don't just control, right, physical bodies or don't have just access to multiple human bodies, but have access to their framing, their integration, their legal kind of character, and thinking here about like, especially white masculine identity and this use of horror or the degraded or the deformed body. Again, this is monsters. The ableism that produces, the misogyny that produces, the kind of pipeline from dissection to that form of conceptual deforming. Anna Chavez writes in New Encounters with Demoiselle d'Avignon that the painting thus betrays a fantasy about the active presence in women's sexual natures for her dark, primitive, degenerate, perhaps diseased biological origins. Francis Francina actually compares African masks that bear some relation to those concocted by Picasso with medical photographs of disfigured, horribly deformed people disfigured, horribly deformed by the effects of syphilis, claiming quite unconvincingly to my eye that there are similarities between them. Observes Baba sagely, black skin splits us under the racist gauge, displacing its signs into signs of bestiality, genitalia, grotesquerie, which reveal the phobic myth of the undifferentiated white whole body. So thinking through caricature and the formation of caricature and how much more space that gives, right, those elevated, dissonant white body, that white whole body that can be mother, father, son, spirit, whatever. I'll continue with the Chavez, that these white women might be metamorphosizing into jungle-nosed nudes as a cause for terror, as parallel scenarios of humans turning into insects or monsters in later horror movies would be. Because mongrels are viewed as impure, degenerate, and corrupting, the notion that indigenous populations are degenerate and savage, having been indispensable, of course, to the rationalization for colonizing them. What looms in Demoiselle d'Avignon is what Marie Dawn identifies as, quote, a strong fear that white women are always on the verge of, quote, slipping back into a blackness comparable to prostitution. The white woman would be the weak point in the system, the signifier of always too tenuous, of the always too tenuous hold of civilization. That horror corresponds, in other words, to what some feminists have diagnosed as a crisis of the masculine brewing in the West by and after the turn of the century, as women and peoples of color increasingly made felt not merely their presence, but their discontent with their inferiorized and subjugated status. The white male's privileged position was thus threatened by increasing claims for political and social autonomy on the part of European women, and by an influx of intriguing artifacts such as African masks that testified to the existence of impressive though alien visions and values in colonized societies at once derided and admired as primitive. So I also want to think about that doubling, right, that slipping back into from woman into slave, slave into woman, because there becomes a gendered aspect of horror as well, where I'd like to insert race into that doubling. For instance, this is a slave mask that was used in the colonies. This is the bridal scold that was created in the 1600s. So right, before sort of testing these withholding apparatuses or whatever, I don't even know, the shit that they use to tie people up and stuff. they're often tested at home, right? So white feudal culture, this goes back to our Rodriguez conversation, the idea of the white family quarrel, right? A lot of like feudal European, and I won't get too much into this, but feudal European and especially white Western Christian from Greco-Roman identity, right, deals with especially the subjugation, the slow political subjugation of the femme body and the reproductive control, and then uses a lot of those, especially elements of like the black viral body, right, even the way zombies reproduce, which I'm sure Memo will get into, through biting or through saliva, through a kind of like, right, passive impregnation. There is a lot of that categorization. I may be like spiraling a little bit on that too much because I do feel like it's relevant maybe to some other stuff, like to the misogynoir aspect, where there becomes this like kind of like another kind of matrix of like feminine, viral, disobedient, black, monstrous, disabled. These kind of caricatures end up being a kind of soup of like of anxiety or fear that then a lot of like these horror narratives are pulled out of. So I think actually Chavez says it better. What is symptomatized by Demoiselle d'Avignon and its reception, and symptomatized more abstractly and indirectly by the shallow space of the Cubist canvas, is a fear that spirals through especially white Western society from the late 19th century to the present. The fear of women and outsiders, including peoples of color, usurping masculine roles and Western prerogatives, assuming agency. In other words, a fear of the loss of male hegemony to get together with a fear of the loss of hegemony of the West are at issue in Demoiselle d'Avignon, so that the painting may read as a gesture of, quote, a recognition and disavowal of the fact that the West, its patriarchal subject, and socios is threatened by loss, by lack, and by others. This is Hal Foster. That slippage is like very clear in the movie Candyman. I'll talk a little bit about Candyman. This is, again, sorry for skipping so wildly through the stuff. Candyman is from 1992, directed by Bernard Rose. It's actually an adaptation of Clive Barker's story that is about kind of like, in the original Candyman, he's like a pinstriper who like actually lives in the toilets of places that are gay men cruise, right? So it's also like a kind of homophobic, it's like Barker re-envisioning a kind of homophobic narrative of a Candyman that his mother would, you know, sort of tell him about, you know, to sort of be like, don't be gay. The narrative is re-articulated, shot in Cabrini Green in the projects of Chicago by Bernard Rose, who's a white director. I think thinking about what we're going to talk about with dissonance and what we've been talking about with white identity and that kind of like constant doubling, I really feel like this in this slide too, and what Rose did that was really interesting with Candyman is that he hypnotizes the actress, right? He hypnotizes her so that she's not giving Scream Queen. But Virginia Madsen was hypnotized by Rose and a private hypnotist so that whenever she was near the actor who played Candyman, she would appear glass-eyed, glazed, over essentially like spellbound, right? And I think there's a way in which, and we talk about this a little bit more in the course than I will today, but you know, the effects of having a scopic regime, having a cinematic regime that reinforces all these social hierarchies, social political hierarchies, especially white supremacist social political hierarchies, is that there's an enchantment, there becomes an enchantment with the violence, a kind of enchantment with, and with that dissonance, right? That dissonance providing not just accountability, but a lot of narrative pillowing and casing for a real kind of like stroll through, right? Like a lot of our Jekyll and Hyde stories, a lot of our Beast Within stories are stories where there is a real excavation of the implications of being a descendant of slaveholders or a descendant of colonial powers, right? But again, the fantasticizing, the making of, the make-believe, right? It's actually a kind of like a Carrie Lambert Beatty term. These enchantments are actually parafictional. They take from, right, we can think about 23 years of Law and Order SVU. They take from real life events in order to gain that ability to stimulate us, to titillate us, to make our nervous systems react. They have to be like based and rooted and steeped in realities. So these kinds of narrative, like especially again, we'll go back to the genocidal narrative, but these genocidal narratives that that create the star-gazed white woman and the black hero or villain, right, are some of the chief means of social political control that have been used. This is Nat Turner, engraving of Nat Turner, but have been used to sort of like ground a lot of that titillation, right? I think there's an article in here, The Last Taboo. That titillation, because that is one of the, like, it's one of the, you know, school to prison pipeline kind of affect, right? It's one of those affective direct pipelines. This is, boxer Jack Johnson, who notoriously is responsible for I feel like, it's hard to say responsible for, but who the King Kong character is really fashioned after. Jack Johnson, you know, publicly dated white women and was like a very famous athlete in the turn of the century 20s. And that, you know, I mean, it's said that, like, you know, his sexual exploits were one of the reasons the Mann Act was created. Again, that kind of like, you know, white fear politic to Hollywood production pipeline, political fear to Hollywood production pipeline. It's seen nowhere else, I mean, nowhere greater, right, than in Jack Johnson and his life and the consequential kind of like aesthetic regimes that are built around him. So Jack Johnson was like so hated and reviled and so also titillated white audiences that there was a nationwide kind of like casting for someone who would beat him in a fight, this Great White Hope. King Kong is one of the horror movies, especially monster movies, that's been remade the most. So King Kong is remade about every 10 years. I tried to start calculating just how much money has been used to make King Kong movies, like ever, but it's kind of like incalculable, and it's definitely well over like $300 million has gone into this narrative. Has its roots in Birth of a Nation, has its roots in a lot of the sort of like fear of integration, fear of, you know, Moynihan Report stuff, fear of like black families or black people integrating into white space, fear of the loss of hegemony, as we, you know, kind of noted from Chavez. This titillation is not selling simply horror movies, it's selling everything, right now. Like, we see the same titillation of the King Kong figure being iterated in so many, not just horror movies, right, but like contemporary moments, from fashion iconography to, I don't know, the Kardashians to the Kanye West shit now. Like, there's like just this pairing is a pairing that I think doubles even again, right, to produce like a trifecta of heroes and monsters. The trope of the black male rapist and the fear of that monster being caught in its sort of clutches, the white woman as the spectacular white whole body, right, the white whole body that's the most hyper-glamorized, doubling as both a trophy and bride of the devil. So, sorry, I'm going to skip around a lot more. Witches of Eastwick. This is this movie called The Witch, 2019. Witches of Eastwick, 1988. This will kind of end my section on white identity, sort of. And then, yeah, this again is this rhetorical dissonance, right? Like, so, right, so much of whiteness is built on especially this extreme rhetorical dissonance. The straw man fallacy, one of my favorite logical fallacies, because it's just so all over the place with Fox News, but the creation of a whole other thing to like hinge or blame or, you know, create a scapegoat for, or a lack of accountability, you know, produce a scapegoat. I think this kind of dissonance is also, it's really interesting because, you know, it's just Wikipedia polls, but cognitive dissonance is, cognitive dissonance, cognitive behavioral therapy, again, this goes back to like thinking about film and especially the stimulus response and the nervous system responses that you know, have seeing flesh torn, seeing flesh violated, that epidermalized power, and the sort of study of what the stimulation of power, right? Like, what does power produce in the body, I think, is like where we see the field of cognitive dissonance really take off from like the 20s, 30s to now. Cognitive dissonance or cognitive behavioral therapy, I feel like, well, I don't really think it works for like non-white people, but that's another day. In the field of cognitive dissonance, so cognitive dissonance is a concept that says that when a person holds two or more contradictory beliefs or values, or participates in an action that goes against their own values, they experience psychological stress, but not necessarily enough stress to actually resolve the conflict. So it's a whole field of methodology created around essentially being an accomplice or an unaccountable witness. And I think and this is my stretch or whatever, and we go a bit more into it in the actual course, and there's a lot more readings in the reader. But a lot of these dissonance experiments are really interesting, right? Because they're less than 10 years after World War II, they're less than 10 years after the Holocaust. And they produce a methodology for testing how far people will take brutality, right? And especially brutality against others becomes a real linchpin in a lot of these studies, right? So Fetzinger has the block study, but Pavlov and Brewer, they're also doing these studies with electric shock currents. Will someone, if they're paid or told by an authority to shock another person, will they shock them? At what? And if they know at a higher and higher volume, what amount of psychological stress in their body will be experienced before they go ahead and shock other people? I think this is like a sort of consequence of Fetzinger and his research, but perhaps one of the greatest impacts of Fetzinger's studies. He's also the creator of the term cognitive dissonance and sort of father of those studies. Lies in their depiction of social behaviors as the responses of a thinking organism continually acting to bring order into the world, rather than as blind impulses of a creature of emotion and habit. So, yeah, again, like, this is this is the psychological kind of like methodologies for studying intention, rationalization, and behavioral control, where we, lose control, reinforcement, and what kind of like reinforcement or rewards function to produce those behaviors. Essentially, it is like the psychological kind of like scientific world, I think, asking itself how the Holocaust could happen, thinking back to our Rodriguez, right? And the family quarrel, and how we stretch those genocidal narratives to like how especially white being and white ontological being stretches those genocidal narratives through not just poetry, but methodological epistemes to create scientific regimes that are based, pretty solely on their experiential dissonance. I don't know. We go flash forward to Zimbardo, who studied under Fetzinger, who's authored a lot of textbooks. I know when I was in early middle school, I had to watch the Philip Zimbardo psychological, I forget what it was even, but he does the Stanford prison experiments in 1971. Again, another experiment on dissonance. This experiment, I think, lasted less than 72 hours. Basically, 6 white men between 18 and 25 were put into a prison experiment. It just slowly devolves into like Lord of the Flies level. I mean, even that there's like literary references for the Stanford prison experiment is really stressful. And like in the, when you watch the experiment, they talk about, every kind of caricature or fairy tale from Beauty and the Beast to, Dracula. One guy's like, I was getting into my villain character. Zimbardo actually, I think, interestingly enough, talks about his early in life being mistaken for other races and ethnicities, such as Jewish or Puerto Rican. This is in the Wikipedia, y'all. So early in life, he experienced discrimination and prejudice growing up poor on welfare and being Italian. He was often mistaken for other races and ethnicities, such as Jewish, Puerto Rican, or Black. Zimbardo said these early experiences in life triggered his curiosity about people's behaviors. Like, it's kind of like, I don't even have to keep going with that. Interestingly enough, right, so it's not like prisons didn't exist before this experiment. It's not like, they didn't, obviously there's a lot of flaws with this experiment, right? They didn't do any there's no diversity checks, there's no whatever. So it really does become a survey series simply of kind of like young white masculine kind of like power and symbol fantasy. So Zimbardo's reasoning for conducting the experiment was to focus on the power of roles, rules, symbols, group identity, and situational validation of behavior that generally would repulse ordinary individuals. This is Zimbardo. I had been conducting research for some years on de-individuation, vandalism, and dehumanization that illustrates the ease with which ordinary people could be led to engage in antisocial acts by putting them in situations where they felt anonymous, or they could perceive others in ways that made them less than human, as enemies or objects. At this point, why would you even have to study that, right? Like, why would you, like, it's just like not only study it, but like create an, like, how is a methodology created to test this? This is why I feel like dissonance in cognitive behavioral studies has to be really seriously re-examined, right? The idea that harmful behaviors aren't predicated by people, like ordinary people, is just completely false. It's another place in which that kind of like, that unaccountability to systems, like large-scale systems of abuse like prison, right? Methods of torture, methods of the containment of others, the disposal of others, again, that logic of evisceration. So Zimbardo himself actually took part in the study. He was the prison superintendent, of course, right? So, like, who could mediate disputes between guards and prisoners. He instructed guards to find ways to dominate prisoners, not with physical violence, but with other tactics, verging on torture, such as sleep deprivation and punishment with solitary confinement. Later in the experiment, some guards became more aggressive, taking prisoners' cots, so they had to sleep on the floor, forcing them to use buckets instead of toilets, refusing for them to empty the buckets, so on and so on, into the genocidal narrative. This guy is one of the, so cognitive dissonance now is really Philip Zimbardo. This is a slideshow from his TED Talk that I just thought was so funny. But you know, his TED Talk, he starts his TED Talk with this image. It's like, if you look at it and focus on the white, you see a world full of angels. But if you look at it and focus on the black, you see a world full of demons. It's really funny to be a black person and hear this, because there is also that, you know what I mean, that dissonance where it's like, do you not hear you're not hearing it. You're not hearing it. You're not hearing yourself. Zimbardo in 2008 noted much later, it wasn't until much later that I noticed how far into my prison role I was at that point. I was thinking like a prison superintendent rather than like a research psychologist. Well, you set up an experiment in which you doubled those roles. In explaining the results, he said that the majority of participants found themselves, quote, no longer able to clearly differentiate between role-playing and self, and that in 6 days the study took to unfold, 6 days. The experience of imprisonment undid, although temporarily, a lifetime of learning. Human values were suspended, self-concepts were challenged, and the ugliest, most base pathological side of human nature surfaced. There's a movie, like a document, I don't know, it's Mondo Cane, so it's like, what is that? It's a particularly gory kind of like pseudo-documentary genre from, 70s US. It's called Faces of Death. That's Philip Zimbardo. Philip Zimbardo now does this project on heroes, right? So he went from the prison experiment to now thinking about what makes people do the right thing when they feel like they can't, it's really insane. But yeah, things like Faces of Death, movies like Faces of Death, a 1979 kind of like documentary horror movie that just is a cinema verite film that actually just goes through with a camera and sort of documents moments of the regimes of evisceration. So it goes through and in Faces of Death, you see a live execution, for instance. You see animals being tortured. You see prisoners being withheld, basic human rights. All of those things that, Zimbardo is creating as a circumstance or as a control, or actually he's creating it as a hypothetical, wherein it's actually a control, right? We actually know, and if you did some studies on prisons or something, whatever, more of them, we would know that those things are the active functioning. That is the principle upon which imprisonment is set, right? Like pathologically exploring the depths of controlling another body. But then to bring it back to the Rodriguez, a deeper focus on racial power as a gendered technology of evisceration helpfully displaces some of the hegemonic gender meta-narratives enmeshing genocide and genocidal violence. Within such regimes of evisceration, principally racial colonial conquest and racial chattel social formations, the lived categories and abstracted classifications of gender and sexuality are subjected to distortion, transgression, and manipulation or mutilation as a matter of the infrastructural emergence of the gender genocidal regimes themselves. This is, just to say that obviously, you're gonna get this out of a prison experiment. So this is also thinking through, that re-gendered, I'm gonna skip this for now. Go back to the notes. So the creation of this kind of mythology around, and the the scientific epistemes that study reaction, nervous response, nervous system response. This is also a product of the Stanford prison experiment, so a concept that Zimbardo terms called the Lucifer effect. He believes that the personality characteristics could play a role in how violent or submissive actions are manifested, but he also says that humans cannot be defined as good or evil because we have the ability to act as both, especially at the hand of the situation. He uses Abu Ghraib, which is just, I mean, again, the kind of echo chamber of these instances, right? Like, he uses Abu Ghraib to think through prison guards and interrogators. And so he's also, again, using, I mean, almost like using, it's like the blind leading the blind, sort of, right? Again, back to that family quarrel that Rodriguez talks about, the genocidal narrative that's created through, essentially, the pressure of whiteness recognizing itself as father, mother, child, jury, executioner, judge, jury, executioner. Even this quote, good people can be induced, seduced, and initiated into behaving in evil ways. They can also be led to act in irrational, stupid, and self-destructive, antisocial, and mindless ways. We go back to, in the course, we think a lot through Nietzsche's The Genealogy of Morals and what it means to be good, right? Which is primarily, it means to be white and wealthy. What it means to be impure, ungood, whatever you have you, is normally reserved for like the sort of like global gendered South, Black and Indigenous South. So there are there's 7 social processes that, and this is, in the Journal of American Medical Association, that Zimbardo identifies as, quote, the slippery slope of evil. One is mindlessly taking the first small step. I'm like, this is dehumanization of others. Sorry, I don't know why that's funny. De-individuation of self. That makes me think of Amy Williams taking the first small step, like the Karen videos, right? That first slope, that step in. Blind obedience to authority, diffusion of personal responsibility, uncritical conformity to group norms, passive tolerance of evil through inaction or indifference. Now we're going to kind of go firmly into horror. Frankenstein, one of the kind of like first, I think the initiators maybe of like the genre of horror as its own sort of like genre. Mary Shelley writes in, Lord, why am I forgetting the date? Well, you can Google it. Early Victorian era, this idea of the colonial, this is from Jalal Tawfiq, but I think this is thinking about this colonial moment where especially Victorian England is looking at, not just how to, but in almost like a massive wave of the influx of, I'll go back to this actually, a massive wave of the influx of colonial goods, peoples, foods, so things that are being consumed, eaten, sprayed in the air, right? Scents, cloths, marbles, construction materials, whatever have you, right? This material world that's being, that Europe is really integrating into, Europe, the architectures of the rest of the world, the jewelries of the rest of the world, the food and the, values, sexual, social, psychological practices of the rest of the world are really destabilizing, right, a lot of European cultural identity and social norms during the Victorian and Gilded Age. There's an extreme amount of poverty, there's an extreme amount of the residue of those feudal systems still. There's also the birth of the medical clinic and public medical clinic. There's a lot of scientific and epistemes, right, because there's that massive control and social bodies that's being erected through colonial slavery. There's also a tightening, right, on the control of bodies in Britain at that time. So I think with this, Magritte reproduction, this Jalal Tawfiq, this again thinking about that mirroring, but Tawfiq calls it the overturn, and I think also this is also not just Frankenstein, but Dracula, the Wolfman, all of these narratives, all of these like kind of archetypes of horror these colonial monsters, right, come out of this moment. And I don't think it's by accident or, I don't think it's unconspicuous that literature is picking up a lot of the poetics of death and using kind of like death as a as a primary means of storytelling, or the undead as a primary means of storytelling. Especially, same thing as Vietnam, right? You have colonial officers coming back from creating or committing huge atrocities worldwide, from the Namibian genocide to the colonialization of India, Africa, Asia, the New World. Murderers, slave owners, rapists, what have you, coming back to European homes, middle class, lower class, upper class European homes, and imposing a kind of that same barbarity right into their family systems. It's not spoken of as such, but we see it in the arts of the Victorian. So the poetry of death is obviously not limited to the revelation of the figurative as literal in the undeath realm, nor is it the undoing of definite embodiment, nor to the surrealist exquisite corpse. So the kind of the creation of these exquisite corpses and corpse economies, right? This is Horatio Gordon Robley. He was a soldier, art collector of the macabre, including multiple trips to New Zealand. On multiple trips to New Zealand, he collected heads, the heads of local tribe. There's also, these stories abound, right, in the colonial. There are stories of, even in the guy of Jameson, one of the founding heirs of the whiskey fortune, paid an explorer group to help him. He wanted to see a woman, or see a person be eaten by others or cannibalized. So there's all these just horrific, real horrific moments within the colonial that I think, horror as a genre is helping us really rationalize. And to hit Dylan Rodriguez again, and thinking about, Sylvia Wynter, who actually I think in her rationalization of the novel and of, Western narrativization also comes to similar points. But Wynter and Du Bois's conception of racial modernity stretches the emergence of overlapping Western scientific and humanistic epistemes of knowledge forms that symbolically intertwine the rationalist production of racial difference via the biological, social, and natural sciences with the discursive, ideological, thus broadly cultural installation of global white ascendancy. So modern raciality produces the latter discursivity through fluctuating notions of historical telos, aesthetics, cultural supremacy, and white humans' transparency as a meta-symbiosis of power dominance that aspires to apprehend, shape, and anticipate human destinies generally, globally, and permanently. So from the medical theater, medical amphitheaters of the turn of the century to now, I think what we understand to be kind of a dissection fetish culture. I think, McNally talks about the monsters of the market and the corpse economy that grew out of the colonial commodification of life. I feel like I'm reading too much now and I'm getting kind of tired, so. The corpse economy is a symbolic register. I'm going to kind of breeze through stuff. That colonial at home family quarrel, right? The European episteme of scientific dissection, probing the internal body. Even Dracula's written the same year, I think a year after the hypodermic needle is introduced. So there's a lot of anxieties about the health of the body, the internal body, what consumption does, what environment does to the body. But also this, huge kind of feudal, so right, a huge power incongruency and an emergent capitalism that's really enabling, especially white landed or moneyed men to completely tear, to literally physically tear apart the other, right? So the anatomy, so much so that anatomy becomes a part of the repressive armory of the state, and public dissections of felons are part of the theater of power. So these theaters were not just, the people here are not just patients, right? They're more often than not criminals, some people who have been convicted of felonies, women who are hysterical. And if you notice, the audience is an audience of, and these are also, this is Charcot, right? Charcot's hysteric experiments, where he electrocuted women to find the source of the aggravation in the womb, were attended not just by doctors, but poets, writers, photographers. So there's a whole aesthetic kind of regime, especially around these theaters, that's produced The Reward of Cruelty, The horrors aroused in the poor by dissection were thus anything, this is also still McNally, were thus anything but simple products of traditional religious ideas about the body and its afterlife, even if they have played some role. Hatred of body snatching and dissection. Oh, body snatching was also very popular during the Victorian time because they needed bodies for these science theaters, so they were just taking them. People would bury themselves with like iron coffins if you had the money to. Even if these have played some role. So hatred of body snatching and dissection seems largely to have derived from vigorous opposition to public humiliation and degradation of the poor. Indeed, 1818, the year of the first edition of Frankenstein, also saw the marketing of metal coffins explicitly meant to thwart body snatchers. The poor, of course, could not afford these luxuries. So again, we're here at this doubling, right? This doubling of the body of the social body. Here our clearest indication of a ritual of social magic is being enacted, a reminder that public anatomy is intended not only to punish and terrorize, but also to exercise ruling class anxieties. Oh, sorry, this is the portrait of Dorian Gray. Another 45 horror movie, doubled. By means of this exorcism, the social body is cleansed of the disease of crimes against property and bourgeois order. Just as the anatomists painted by Rembrandt conclude their activities with a torchlight procession, so the company of surgeons brews a magic potion meant to ward off evil. So this is also sort of about this, what the public exorcism is. This is also thinking about, you know, what it is to have a punitive system, or a system of like not just a punitive system, but one that takes felons and dissects them or uses slaves as medical material or scientific material, right? Another reason why like horror movies and genocidal narratives have such a stimulation response, why we are so responsive to gore, I think is that, you know, those medical amphitheaters end up becoming anxieties, right, for the consequences of the descendants of slaves. Not even, I think like the anxiety around not being able to control the destiny, right, your destiny, your body, your physical material. Posthumously for the descendants of slaves and indigenous people. This is the body of Harriet Cole, extracted by Rufus Weaver. Harriet was his black servant. This is still hanging in Philadelphia today. But yeah, this sort of like, again, total control, total domination to dissect, sever, disembowel, produces a lot of modern surgery, right? But it also produces a lot of propaganda. And a lot of those grounded fears in that propaganda and a lot of the images, right, of the consequences of being able to be dominated like that. I think these slides are out of order. I should just talk about some of the films. This is Creature from the Black Lagoon, Mimic, Anxiety Around the Homeless. I think the thing about eugenics here is eugenics anxiety, Children of the Damned, white saviorism, another true global horror. And then thinking about sort of, I won't go into like the actual movies. I think that's something that we do in class that's really fun, is that we can, because most of these movies and most of the movies that we looked at, you can go scene by scene, right? With like these doublings, the genocidal narrative, the real historical kind of evidence of the pretty much like within 10-year span of whenever the movie was made, that the movie is predicated on, the anxiety that the movie hangs on, right? That's like a real social, political, or cultural anxiety. But I want to talk, kind of end also with what I find to be one of the most horrific aspects of especially the white male distribution body, like the kind of like collective doubling that doubling again of white identity that makes mother, father, child all one collective folk, and I think the means of production that are enabled by that. So, and what I mean by production is not, I guess there's no other way to be like more nuanced, but production, right? Like assembly lines, supply chains, physical kind of space, right? Fitzcarraldo was made in 1982. Werner Herzog carries a boat up a mountain, right? Using indigenous labor. This movie is attempting, right? Like a lot of the films and period pieces of today are attempting to capture previous moments in time or these eras of colonial history in which, in order to produce the film, you must reproduce the material circumstance, right? So this is not an actress or an actor pretending to be a slave and pretending to be a slave owner, right? This is also the recreation of the bed frame, the bed, the place, the space, the mise en scène, right, of those events. And what that is, and the truly horrific part of this moment, I think, is that our cultural anxieties and that means of production are so tightly fused, right, that it almost takes no time from political spectacle to Netflix document. There's a Netflix movie called Karen about a psychotic white woman, you know, and we've just started seeing these movies, these you know, interpersonal archives maybe a couple years ago developing. And with that name even, I think it's less than a year in public common sense. But back to Fitzcarraldo, so there's this almost like this extreme pipeline, right, with whiteness, dissonance, and horror, where horror films are recreations of colonial genocidal instances of the terror of others, right? And they often use, in order to, you know, create these effects, right, they have to use the terror of others. So I'll just read some. This film is clearly problematic, but the real-life experience of those who worked on the production is horrifying. The deadly ordeal was captured in the documentary Burdens of Dreams, which I recommend you guys all see. So like the semi-fictional Fitzgerald, Herzog too led his indigenous workers up the river, where many of them died and were met with death and disease. Nick Thorpe for the Sunday Herald described some of the horrors. In one of the region's driest summers on record, scavenging, I'm going to say that wrong, Amohaka tribesmen launched a scavenging hit-and-run raid on the film camp. One man was lucky enough to survive an arrow through the throat while his wife was hit in the stomach, necessitating 8 hours of emergency surgery on a kitchen table. The attack was one of the catalogues of disasters, including 2 plane crashes in which 5 people were critically injured, 1 paralyzed, and the death of a young Highland Indian who drowned after borrowing a canoe without permission. Among more than 1,000 extras, a few perished from disease, although arguably not as many as might naturally have done so without the presence of the production's camp doctor. A Peruvian logger bitten by a deadly snake made the dramatic decision to cut his own foot off with a chainsaw to prevent the spread of the venom. So this description of deaths of Native people comes several paragraphs into Thorpe's essay. Their lives are given only a passing mention. I have not found any sources listing their names. I also could not find any sources listing the names of the people who died on the set of Fitzcarraldo. Yeah, so again, shot in Brazil by a German, the lives and well-being of indigenous people seem to matter very little to film buffs. Roger Ebert, whom I generally admire, wrote, the Brazilian engineer resigning and walking away after telling Herzog there was a 70% chance that the cables would snap and dozens of lives would be lost, and yet Ebert calls the frame brave and epic. Again, that thing we go back to, right, where the interpretation of great violence is given auteur status, right, is given to the director who's able to authentically interpret that violence, right? Even if it means recreating that physical violence. So Ebert also wrote of the crew member who was bitten by a snake and had his foot cut off. Ebert finds that Herzog, quote, could have filmed his entire production a day or 2 outside of Quito, the capital of Ecuador, but the critic praises the director's deadly decision because it made a few vast panoramas. Similarly, someone like Stanley Kubrick is a similar director, right? Like this, the authenticity that he's able to get from his actors, the reality of the landscapes is often from and by one-to-one casting in fucked up places with fucked up people doing fucked up stuff to them. Like the torture that Shelley Duvall went through on the set of The Shining is well documented. This is Shelley Duvall in The Shining. This is her telling Dr. Phil how this film ruined her life. While making the film, he frequently kept her in isolation, cut off her lines, forced her to perform the baseball bat scene 172 times. I think that's in the Guinness Book of World Records. For a scene with spoken dialogue, her hands were shaking, her eyes red, puffy, from genuinely crying. Afterwards, she presented the director with clumps of her own hair to show just how close to the edge she was. He goes on to tell Duvall it doesn't help you and would frequently tell her that she was wasting his time and the time of everyone on set. He advised crew members to ignore her and refuse to praise her work. Duval would cry for up to 12 hours a day and eventually ran out of tears, which means she was literally too dehydrated to cry. To go back to that Virginia Madsen from Candyman, Virginia Madsen is also allergic to bees. So they had to have behind the camera at all times, like a full medical team that could potentially help her. But it was also, the idea of the hypnosis was also for her own good, so that she wouldn't react to not just the character but to the bees. So and also, she doesn't go into this in any interviews that I could find, but she actually asked, this violence against white women is frequently noted as, I don't even know, kind of a gold standard, or a standard for the auteur, the white Western especially auteur, and horror provides an interesting pipeline, I think, in terms of that, right? Because horror is often given the term of pure cinema, right? Because the narratives don't matter, apparently, you know what I mean? Or we're not thinking about even the B movie, right? It's about these innovations in film, how to create the special effect, how to create the cinematic, how to titillate, right? Like how to create the compositions that titillate, the sounds that titillate. We know a lot of our, most famous directors are horror directors, right? We don't know a lot of sci-fi directors off bat, but we do know our Wes Cravens, our Clive Barkers, we know those people, Stephen King's. And a lot of the time they go from author to auteur, right? From DIY to avant-garde to popular through the abuse of the femme body, especially the white femme body, or the rupturing of the white femme body. This is two different Tarantino movies, but Tarantino, another auteur who uses grindhouse and hardcore and horror movies and their aesthetics, right, to also produce very dysfunctional political narratives. But Uma Thurman was basically almost killed a couple times while making Kill Bill, and the idea that the efficacy, or not the efficacy, but the authenticity of the piece is more important than the lives producing it. All lives producing it except the directors, obviously. Thurman says that in Kill Bill, Tarantino had done the honors with some sadistic flourishes himself, spitting in her face in a scene where Michael Madsen is on screen doing it, and choking her with a chain in the scene where the teenager Goro was doing it. So he actually stands in, again, horror. This is, I think we all probably know, the Bertolucci scene from Last Tango in Paris, where Maria Schneider is sexually assaulted. So it was in the script that he had to rape her in a way, the director said, and we were having with Marlon breakfast on the floor, we were shooting, there was baguette, there was butter, we looked at each other, and without saying it, we knew what we had to do. Bertolucci acknowledges that he hadn't told Schneider about the butter beforehand, but he wanted her reaction as a girl, not as an actress, right? I wanted her react to being humiliated. He said he felt guilty after that, but he did not regret it, because you have to be completely free. So again, facilitating an on-screen rape, right, in order to get the feel, right, to capture the image. Even this thing that he says of not wanting her to be the actress but the girl. A lot of those ruptures, right, around the performance of harm, the performance of terrorizing, and the aesthetics of how it looks, right, the beauty of the dead body, the hung woman, the drowned woman, the Ophelia complex of a lot of these white male auteurs. Again, this goes back through all of the stuff we talked about, from Christian Road to the Vietnam kind of generation of auteurs. But this is 1977 when Polanski is first arrested for child sex prostitution. Polanski, who's made Rosemary's Baby and Fearless Vampire Killers, also considered an auteur in his own right, but in particular also a horror auteur, was convicted of raping a 10-year-old. It's noted also that he's still won, this is also from our Weinsteins to our Woody Allens, still wins awards, is not barred from any academy, is only barred from entering the United States. He now lives in France, where he continues to make movies and win awards. So multiple, not just allegations, but convicted rape charges for Polanski. Lars von Trier, I'll stop slapping asses in the wake of #MeToo. So von Trier also I mean, I think we don't even think of him as a horror director, but we think of him as a visceral director, right? We have actually in the reader, in the Whiteness, Dissonance, and Horror reader, we have a small, like 100, almost like 100-page section that's only psycho directors, right? So it's just white film directors who have killed people, raped people, murdered people, gotten away with it, and committed those things to screen. And it's 102 pages, and that was a general search until my assistant was like, I'm not binding these anymore. It's everywhere, right? So that doubling of like not just whiteness, dissonance, and horror, but of also, you know, what does a society need? Why does society need heroes and monsters? I think this is where I'll like really end. But to give us a sense of some path to follow, I think this is kind of phenomenologically the use of monsters, the use value of both the monster and the hero. This is from Joseph Campbell's Primitivist Mythology, or The Mask of the Myth. Primitive Mythology, Masks of God. This is another kind of primitive, along with like Rudyard Kipling. Joseph Campbell is like considered one of the like kind of founders of anthropology, modern anthropology. He's a colonialist, scientist, discoverer, explorer, whatever, and writer. So it's similar to another book called The Golden Bough, but he writes this book on you know, kind of primitive mythologies from around the world. And it's funny because in this book, and you know, it's one of those like, nobody's really asking for this, but it's like, he'll be like, these are the masks of this place. And then he'll like be like, this is, you know what I mean? This is why it's scary. So I pulled a couple of these quotes to go through, and then we'll just kind of go through some more pictures. But the primary image, which he's termed the archetype, is always collective, common to at least whole peoples or periods of history. So the primary image he then suggests is a memory deposit, anagram derived from a condensation of innumerable similar experiences, the psychic expression of an anatomically, physiologically determined natural tendency. So I want us to think about what primary images and archetypes whiteness possesses. That's my homie, that's Jane Elliott. She also does these dissonance experiments. I won't stick on her for too long. But this is also back to Campbell, right? So the innate releasing mechanism designed to, that is inherited, Students of animal behavior have coined the term innate releasing mechanism to designate the inherited structure in the nervous system that enables an animal to respond thus to a circumstance never experienced before, and the factor triggering the response they term a sign, stimulus, or releaser. So sign, stimulus, or releaser, these are the things that scare us before we see them, right? So this is an accumulation of signs, an accumulation of signifiers, an accumulation of myths, narratives, pictures, right? If we think about what horror is from a genre from Frankenstein all the way to now, I'm asking us this, and I ask in this course that we start thinking about what those sign stimuluses, what those releasers are, that we're dealing with, and especially how whiteness often produces both the sign, the stimulus, and the release, right? So this is George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, in which Romero kind of like, and I don't, you know, we don't know because he's sticking to his story, but he says, you know, that the lead character was cast not because of his race, but because he was the best actor on set. It dramatically changes the story, since at the end, this lead character is still survives the zombie attack and still murdered by police. I don't know, thinking about these primary images, right? The masses, the horde, the disenfranchised, the murdered via war, via extreme violence. Here we have an extremely precise image, never seen before, yet recognized with reference not merely to its form, but to a form in motion, and linked furthermore to an immediate, unplanned, unlearned, and even unintended system of appropriate action, flight to cover. The image of the inherited enemy is already sleeping in the nervous system, and along with it, the well-proven reaction. So texts like this that are generated during the colonial, right? Texts like this that are generated during the colonial produce epistems that further, and we've said this a couple times or whatever, but further remove accountability, right, for behaviors, violent behaviors. Interestingly enough, too, Tom Savini, this is Tom Savini, he's one of my favorite like horror movie special effects artists, but he was also a Vietnam War veteran and a photographer during the Vietnam War, so his studio is set up where he's taking documentation of like wartime, like the atrocities that he saw in Vietnam in order to do his special effects. So these are also, it's sort of interesting, thinking about this like innate fear that lives in us. I'm gonna kind of wrap up now. That's not important. Frankenstein, The Island of Dr. Moreau. So yeah, maybe I'll just go through here and we can think about those primary images and the archetypes, the signs, and the stimulation. So yeah, I'll end there, but I'll keep going through the slides and you can ask any questions. Sorry, that was an awkward ending.
Candice, I have a clarifying question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, sure. I just wanted to clarify quickly that Campbell quote that you had. He himself was quoting Jung in that, right?
The Campbell?
Yeah, where he's talking about the archetype.
The
That's
archetypes.
a quote by Jung.
Mm-hmm.
Quoting, yeah, okay, thank you.
There's a couple questions also from our online audience, if you want to check that.
Do I just look at
I'll get it for you all, and we have one
Okay.
in the audience right
Oh, okay. I see it.
Okay, okay.
Thank
But,
you.
She's got the mic.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, thank you for your talk. A quick question. You referenced sci-fi a few times, and I'm curious about the intersection of, your studies on horror and the kind of sideways sci-fi that, kind of what I call Armageddon porn, where the end of the world, the zombies or the aliens or the et cetera, and how that interacts with the same conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a side thing, thinking about Frankenstein and how that was written in this climate moment, how kind of our current climate moment might also kind of meet that intersection into a triangle, or is that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this last slide actually is it was deleted from the original. It was edited out of the original ending of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So it's funny, but in Bram Stoker's original Dracula, there's this moment where they get out of the castle and they're watching the castle implode, and it like, for me, it reads like a nuclear explosion. So as we looked, there came a terrible convulsion. So the earth seemed to rock and fro, and rocked to and fro, and we fell to our knees at the same moment with a roar which seemed to shake the very heavens. The whole castle and the rock, even on the hill, seemed to rise into the air and scatter into fragments with a mighty cloud of black and yellow smoke, volume on volume, rolling in grandeur, was shot up towards an inconceivable rapidity. And then there was a stillness. And I like the last line, we were so appalled with the suddenness and the grandeur that we forgot to think of ourselves. And I do think that there is, I think sci-fi and horror definitely have these intersections, because they come out of, I think, an obfuscation of epistemes of knowledge that are being built conspicuously out of racial, political, colonial, white supremacist intention. But they're distributed as fact or truth. And I think there's always going to be a space in that dissonance for poetics and for the literary, to play around in. I was actually thinking here, because I do think that a lot of that doubling is simply, what the poetic is, kind of how the poetic acts, how the literary acts in general, how myth acts in general. But I think with science fiction, it's more pointedly, I think they're both about calculating or aestheticizing anxieties in the current moment. For Dracula, I didn't realize it read to me like an atomic bomb, but there was also the beginning of dynamite fracking and dynamite explosions, mining, especially in Eastern Europe in those times. So there's Dracula and the hypodermic needle are kind of created simultaneously. I think a lot of the stuff, there's a section that I teach on apocalypse and biblical prophecies, and we look at a lot of the meltdown climate change countdown movies. I would recommend that Ravon Foch article too that's in the Reader on the Gulf, the wretched of the Gulf. So blackness and the dispossessed and the kind of technologically dispossessed, and climate catastrophe and apocalypse narratives. I took out of here some scenes from The Happening that like simultaneously look like kind of like climate crisis images and 9/11 images. So there's like, I think, a muddling of all of them, you know, like the zombie movies, for instance, I think that we've seen post-pandemic deal a lot more with climate crisis than the zombie movies of the 50s. Like thinking about like, you know, 28 Days Later and, you know, the zombie movies that we have now that really fashion a, you know, a different climate. The Girl with the Special Abilities, for instance. Like a horror movie that says like, you know, these are the zombies post this, like climate change is inherent to the production of zombies. Yeah, so I think they are all tied in, but I do think they're in a way, just a general sense, the way that scopic regimes build from cultural anxiety and try to normalize and stabilize cultural anxieties into, you know, aesthetic forms that we can all kind of feel that we share without sharing consequence, share vision of without sharing consequence. Does that make sense? I don't know, maybe that didn't answer your question at all.
Hi, thank you very much. In the current climate of DEI reports and companies coming to terms with that, and how do you see whiteness, like what role are they playing? You know, you talk about duality of whiteness. Is that fragility? Is that, you know, because now there's they're coming across as the victim, right? Like all the spotlight is on people of color, and now we're being discriminated against. How would you categorize that?
I mean, the same. I mean, it's been like that, I would say. I think that is the key characteristic of the white person. It's like the thing is, it's the epidermalized power that then says like, I am everything. You know, like I am every man, I am every woman, I'm every child, I'm also every story, I'm every part of the story. I wrote the story, I distribute the story. That doubling, like, I mean, there's just so much stuff, like, every day, right? We get hit with it every day, of the doubling of victimhood. Like, I think Kyle Rittenhouse was probably the last thing that made me, like, want to throw the computer. But, you know, this person who's killed multiple people, right? This murderer, like, a person who went and intentionally murdered people in public, that was caught on film, crying about like not wanting his life to be over or imprisoned. So there's a lot, you know, like I pulled, I think 2 slides of Tucker Carlson, because you can go on Fox right now and watch somebody be like, they're destroying my country, I'm so scared for my family, who's an active, you know, I mean a harmful person, right? Yeah, what was the first part of the question again?
First part. No, I think you answered it. It was just really about you know, the victim as opposed to the torturer, right? Like, you know, it's now that the spotlight is going on to, you know, people of color and companies trying to, you know, make amends or do DEI reports and, you know, say, well, we're trying to do this and we're doing programs. And then there's the other side that's like, well, now we're being discriminated against.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that blackfishing, all that stuff. There's an interesting one, a text outside from a show we did at LAX Art called Whiteness, or The Absolute Right to Exclude, on Whiteness as Property by Cheryl Harris. And Cheryl Harris talks about, you know, just sort of like what reputation is in terms of currency for whiteness. I think that's actually at the root of a lot of the DEI stuff, because reputation, especially white fraternity and reputation, is currency. Is a you know, it's part of their financial kind of like stake and stakeholding. So there is a way where I think a lot of that new rhetoric and rhetorical fallacies that are circulating right now, like from blackfishing to, you know, the whole Kardashian complex of like really extracting black social currency and turning that into, you know, like white material currency and white wealth. I think a lot of that is about the way that, you know, the commodification of the black body is actually being shifted out of the capacity to make wealthy black bodies. But that's another day.
Hi, if I could just comment further on that. I was thinking all the way through this about this need for those in power to see themselves as victims. And in fact, that goes back to the white man's burden. And it just seemed to be a through thread in almost everything you said. And there's a book by Fintan O'Toole about Brexit, where he, as an Irishman, looks at the English psyche, and he says that the problem for the English as imperialists was they saw themselves as good, honorable people, and yet they were torturing other people. And so in order to resolve that cognitive dissonance, they had to see themselves as the victim.
Right. I mean, I would say even like to resolve the cognitive dissonance, the theories of cognitive dissonance were created.
Yeah.
We would just say, do right. You know what I mean? And it's funny too, actually, it reminds me of a Spiller's essay called Everything You Would Know If Sigmund Freud's wife was your mother, where she actually talks a little bit about the implications of psychoanalysis in West African cultures, where like essentially there is no inherent sense of what repression is, right? Repression is not an aspect or fluid aspect of culture. So in a lot of those cultures, how you seem is how you are. There isn't a sense of like the beast within, right? And even thinking about Derrida and the beast and sovereignty, like this idea that you know we're all supporting via means of internalizing our negative or our evil, right? Supporting a better society because we're flushing ourselves out, our natural negative animal impulses, right, out through or channeling them through ... Yeah, it's a trip.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much. In a lot of the examples that you gave, especially in the last sort of film stills, you know, they're made by these artists, auteurs, quote unquote, and in thinking about like sort of how much of the rhetorical space, thinking about authorship of being an artist and being a filmmaker is given to defending the violence that's happening on screen and off screen. And sort of, I'm curious about your thoughts on sort of like the state of even just like, I guess, that word, those words, when so much of the space is given to them, is given to those things to defend, to say, you know, oh, Lars von Trier, you know, he had to do it. Oh, Gaspar Noé, he had to do it. Sort of what does that then mean for, or what do you think, what have you thoughts on what that means for people who are currently making within certain lineages, whether they like it or not, that it's within those lineages, I guess, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, I think this is kind of the question of like, is the camera inherently racist or is the film inherently a racist object? And I go back and forth. I think I can only speak really personally, but really personally, you know, it is wild the amount of space it takes up, or that those logics take up. I've been told in interviews, like, you know, like violence is like everything is inherently violent, or all things have inherent violence, and it's like, you know, I think we really like even things like the Kitty Genovese one class we talk about, just like sort of the stranger danger to like, you know, it just, I think a lot of those, isolating is what it is. It's alienating. The amount of space that the logic of evisceration takes up in all art production is, I think it is intended to alienate us. And personally, I do feel very alienated by that often. I think it's also really interesting ethically, right? Like, because people of color, especially people of color, women, thinking about right now how Black Lives Matter is being like so deeply framed in public discourse, but we aren't allowed, right? We aren't allowed to, like, if we don't do, you know, perform our ethical codes to the T in praxis. This is also, I think, why in Crisis we look to Black feminist praxis, or the world looks to Black feminist praxis, right? Is because we have to live those conceptual realities, our material realities, our reaffirmed material realities, our like networked material realities. They're not just discursive, you know? So even like, you know, founding a nonprofit with Cassandra, or making works with found footage, or especially being a director right now and directing dance, that's where I kind of think about that question of authorship a lot, right? Like, okay, I might want to see something that the body can't do, and it's up to the dancer to tell me my body can't do that. And then it's up to me to be like, cool. Let's do something else. You know what I mean? But that's unnatural in a lot of these instances, right? We're like rental space, producers, curators, critics, to, you know, like even just technicians, people in spaces will be like, will not recognize me as doing my job without alienating my performers, right? So if I'm not in my, you know, like kind of like, if I'm not on my violent tip on set, I get washed over, you know, like, so it's like, it's funny, as being like a Black woman director, I think, or Black femme director, I don't know what people think about the word femme, woman. I'm like, I kind of like don't give a fuck. I feel like the Black femme dimension is its own gender, I really feel. And having that gender and having that complicated gender, that complication of narrative structures that you know, carry or hold my gender in public, I'm easily breezed out of means of production, right? Like I'm easily given somebody's coat to carry when I come in to something, or I'm easily, and it's like, it is about a kind of a level of physical composure and a control over, you know, your elements, your materials, your histories, and sometimes even the things that are outside of my control, right? If the institution's hosting, or space is hosting, or anti-Black, or anti-woman, or ableist, there's also an intentional kind of like caricature of the mammy to fight against in that regard, right? Like as crippling, as psychopathic as the white male director is, right? The mammy is the inversion to a crippling effect. It's the same kind of production skill set, devalued. So yeah, like the kind of like the skill of being able to like put people in space, make sure they're okay, make sure they're documented, make sure those, you know, like all of those procedural kind of like implications of the mammy, right? That they're cooked, they're fed, they're homed, they're everything, are completely inversed in the slave master, the auteur director. So I feel like I fight in between those things all the time, because there are literally, you know, policies, and this is the thing that's the hardest to shape my mind, or wrap my mind around as I make more complicated and more expensive work, to be honest. But there are a lot of policies that prevent anything but harmful interactions from the director and performer, for instance, or, and that's like something I'm learning, you know, like theater by theater, instance by instance, you know, creation by creation, and it trips me out daily, you know what I mean, thinking about the power that like a Weinstein has. And we don't think of it as political power, right? But these are dictators. Like, these are dictators. We don't think about it as genocidal narratives, right? But when Kanye makes a video with 12 hanging dead white models, you know what I mean? And then talks shit about Harriet Tubman, and then we live in a world, right, where, you know, Ketanji Brown is on hour 13 of being like abused with straw man fallacy after rhetorical fallacy after, I mean, the dissonance on display there kept me in bed for 3 days. Like, I could not deal with other people, period. You know what I mean? After like kind of what I'm reading, how I work, and then that trial, it just kind of like resounds that a lot of these issues with, especially how white people perceive themselves and their interconnectedness with others, like, are not going anywhere. So yeah, so personally, the auteur shit is really wild because it's everywhere. I have a personal prediction too, Cassandra-wise. I think in another 5 years we're going to see, and probably less, it'll probably be more like 2 years, a real resurgence of like white masculine emotionality and its irrationality and its harm in museums and institutions. I think a lot of that DEI moment of pushing to have Black and brown people in spaces of curatorial power is going to like, there's going to be a big backlash, I think, to like, I see shows coming in like Picasso's Soft Side, you know what I mean? Like, I really do, because they're not going to stop, because there's a market that's locked. That's millions of dollars of value that needs to be produced, discursive value that needs to be produced to maintain millions of dollars of investment value in not just the painting and the canvas, but the building it's in, the nation it's under, the economies it promotes and that are around it. So those structures aren't going anywhere until those material structures disintegrate. Or those conceptual structures aren't going anywhere until those material structures disintegrate. But I will say that there is a real strong shift, and I think that's you know, the henchman thing, like thinking about the class I want to turn this course into, Blackness, Dissonance, and Terror, So what happened, interestingly enough, in the classes, when I first started the classes in 2020, was that, you know, most of the black students and black and brown students were like, I can't talk about this with white people, because I had like white students would be like, I love horror. I'm a horror movie buff, you know what I mean? Like, even being, I'm a movie buff. I know all the things that happened on set and all these anecdotes, and we don't hear them the same. You know what I mean? Like having people be like, yeah, and you know, Tom Savini was also like a Vietnam War photographer. That's why he gets the explosion heads right really well, you know, like, and it's like, me and the like Vietnamese student aren't hearing that the same way that you're hearing that. You know what I mean? So we ended up segregating the classes just because people like asked for it, because I had very different discussions, right? And I had to really, there was a lot more, like a lot of this historical stuff is added because this was a purely kind of like, let's go through movies and talk about instances in movies. A lot of the historical stuff had to be added because white students had no understanding outside of the fantastical, right, of these narratives. And, you know, especially like black, brown, indigenous, and femme students had only experiential knowledge. So it was really, you know, hard to kind of fuse the conversations. And that I think goes back to that question of like, it is an actual burden to be in rooms where this logic of evisceration takes up more space than any kind of logic produced to understand, you know, the material real. So yeah, thanks for that question.
And what do you think of what Jordan Peele's doing?
So that's the class that I'm still putting together the notes for this class, honestly, and I don't know when it's gonna, like, when I'll start teaching it, because I really want to figure out what I think about it first, but something's happening, you know what I mean? I think that's all I can really say. I think Web 2.0 sparked something, and something's happening. Like I said, the idea of white guilt, white violence, white fragility, also another weird dissonant concept. Like, how are you being fragile by not knowing that you're harming people? Like, whatever. Yeah, like something's happening where I think that there is, at first I was excited, I have to say, like 2020, I was like, oh, maybe there's a way where like the kind of primitivism that has made black people and indigenous people the focus of a lot of the affect, release, and catharsis of white guilt, you know what I mean, could be like made into some kind of Trojan horse, you know what I mean? But I think actually like what's sort of becoming clearer is that I think there are just, it's policies from Plessy versus Ferguson to now, this is whiteness as property, but I really think it's like whiteness had not just social currency, but the potential to produce social wealth, social currency, and produce wealth. It produced material wealth and social wealth through reputation. So the safeguards of reputation have been movies, books, you know what I mean? Like all this stuff, the reason why we respect white male politicians who are stealing from us is not because we know them, right? It's because we have this history of images that we've seen that show us the consequences of not, that show us the reality of the harmony of not resisting, right? That give us our sci-fi, you know, utopian narratives and our horror dystopian narratives with revolts and resistance. So I think there's a way where like, right now, and this is also, I'm speaking really personally because I feel like I'm a part of a kind of like, and I've heard it be called a Black Renaissance. I really don't like that, but I do think that there is, you know, a lot of trade and new kinds of forms of commodification, maybe just new participation in forms of commodification previously unavailable to Black audiences. And I don't think that and I say audiences, not artists, not cultural producers, right? Because we're still in the same fucking place. But the perception of our work is widening to, again, that Black chattering class. And I think this is a Joy James thing, but you know, so Joy James talks about the captive maternal, again, that mammy figure that produces the world but is not given credit for shit. And how that's ungendered also, right? Like you can be of any gender and be that mammy figure for Black communities. But there were so many intentions to abolition, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't one uniform tribal council or confederation that said we're gonna push back against slavery for this reason, this reason, this reason, period. There were pockets of Black communities pushing for abolition since day one, some of them to intermarry, some of them to join managerial classes, some of them to leave, right? Some of them to maroon, some of them to go back, some of them to, you know what I mean? All those different intentions produce all different consequences of abolition. And I think what we see right now too in horror movies, I think is going to be just the first symptom or the first sign or something, because it is that direct political to like literary device, or anxiety kind of like literary device, anxious literary device. But yeah, I think there's like, damn, I'm just going all the way around this point. I just think something's happening right now where like, I think the forms of terror that we as Black and brown people are used to suffering, those are kind of like becoming mine, and we're less interested in, we can't do microaggressions now that we're sharing more. We're recognizing harm collectively way more. We're not recognizing consequences of abolition together, right? Some people do just want to fuck white girls. Some people do want slavery abolished. Some people do want, prison gone. Some people do want to own a multinational corporation like white men do, right? Some people do want to just step into those power vacuums. Some people want those power vacuums eliminated. So now we have a consequence, like a panopticon of consequences of abolition. And I see kind of Jordan Peele in one of those little zones, and like a lot of the new horror and new Black horror in one of those zones where a consequence of, this is like the Death of a Salesman piece too, one of the consequences of us owning our own destinies and owning our own reputations is that we can also own the evil in ourselves. We can also own what we codify as evil. We can also own the human characteristics that are base in us. Does a world exist in which that won't be exacerbated by external environments? Not yet, no, maybe never. But maybe part of this, multitude of sharing of Black communities, I think it just is a consequence of these multiple Black communities sharing, that new mythologies are emerging. And I think especially the Black monster, toxic Black patriarchy, colorism, all those things are going to be new monsters. We're going to be seeing a lot more new monsters now that we have voices that are talking, you know what I mean? That these different Black communities that are talking, and that are, I think in this moment being invited, to the board meetings, or in this moment being able to kind of facilitate their own means of production a little bit clearer. Yeah, but I do see those new genre horror films fitting somewhere in there. And I think it's just a double-edged sword, right? Where it's like, I'm all for us, like, and especially Black and brown people in this moment as disenfranchised political subjects, creating new mythologies and reworking those old mythologies. I do see a larger, still system of movie production and cinema distribution that is still calculatedly white supremacist and will use those tropes and a lot of that new language against us. So I think it's like kind of, weaponize that language to perform the same shit, Jack Johnson shit. So, I don't know, long way to answer that, sorry.
I think we have one. Do we have one more question? Okay, and then we're gonna wrap for.
Just kind of a follow-up maybe, so it's something that you've mentioned often, thinking about something is happening right now, right? And I'm curious your thoughts about where this dissonance lies in the space of remakes of kind of classic horror. Like right now they've done a remake of Firestarter, right? And they've cast another little Bond girl and done it. Like, do you see any bend there? Do you see a reinforcement? Do you see, like, what are you seeing there?
Again, like we were saying, I really feel like it's a double-edged sword, and I think it's the confusion of right now as well. Like we have a culture that's doubling over and bending backwards, trying to like address the realities of slavery and cope with the realities of slavery, you know what I mean? Without that buffer of like these, legitimizing poetics that have, made Sally Hemings into the girl from Scandal, you know what I mean? Or like without the Bridgerton effect. And I feel like God bless Shonda, because this is also a part of it, you know what I mean? If Jordan Peele's in that matrix of whatever is happening now, Shonda's in it too, you know what I mean? And there's definitely, this is a similar pool of,
we're seeing it a different way. And there's a line in one of his recent series where he talks about slavery and how for people of color, they're always living with it. And for white people, it's like they don't have to learn it, they don't have to know about it. They choose,
Right.
if they choose to.
And even Julie Dash talks about this too, and how hard it was to get, films about black women distributed, right? Is like that nobody wants to live in the fantasy of the black woman's body. You know what I mean? You don't want to look at the screen and then double yourself. And that's another thing that happens with horror movie audiences, right? The catharsis is in watching the thing happen that you then can say it's not going to happen to me. We don't have that as black and brown people. When we watch a body get flayed or lynched or medically torn apart, dissected, we don't have that. We don't have that same distance from physical harm. So it does stop a little bit, of that. But I think it's a similar conversation with the work of Ava DuVernay or something right now. Like what does cinema hold for black people post this moment? I don't know, because I feel like I'm interested in adaptations too. Like I just made an adaptation. I feel like it is a moment where the adaptation is really called for because it's an address, it's a redress, right? What kind of distribution those adaptations, I think, have is another question that really confuses not even confuses, but makes, it fractures, you know what I mean? Any kind of implication for one goal.
Thank you, Candice.
Sure, the lady
This
behind
was
you.
amazing. Thank you all.
The girl behind you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Person behind you.
I'll ask this question quickly. I was wondering about, because you kind of speak a little bit about this idea of the necro-imaginary, and also about the necro-imaginary pipeline, and also this idea about the means of production and whiteness as kind of this thing that sees itself in multiple places, in that 360 view. And I guess I kind of was curious, now that it's 2022 and the means of production for cinema are quote unquote democratized in that way, there's a tension, I guess, for me in the idea of those tools of production being viral, and the way virality is kind of associated with blackness, but also of those tools of production being total and all-encompassing and omnipresent in a way that mentally is also associated with me with whiteness. And so I wondered if you could touch on that in some way.
Well, I guess, two things. There's virality and promiscuity. That's a Robert Payne case study turned into a book. I think it's called Virality 2.0. So he talks about homophobia in the AIDS crisis, and then how virality was shaped then, and then how it's kind of shaped post-internet culture, which is right on the back of the AIDS crisis. How that same language is used then to implicate something good or something that you want, right? You didn't want to be viral in the 80s or early 90s. Ain't nobody want to be viral then. We don't want to be viral now, really, after the pandemic. We want antivirals, but for a hot moment, I think, in the platforming. And what Payne talks about basically is that, again, this idea of titillation, this is also kind of Preciado, the psychosexual pharmacornucopia. But the idea that the senses, right? The senses, and this is us as just beings. Our senses are our main. This is what marketing kind of attacks, right? Marketing doesn't just attack your livelihood and your well-being. It's that starts with an attack on the senses. And virality, I think, thinking about Jack Johnson too, the way that blackness kind of acts as almost like a semiotic volcano, right? Is that we go from sign real fast to hyper icon. This is Breonna Taylor's plight. To go from one individual that suffers throughout a litany of a condition, right, to becoming a hyper icon of that condition. That happens with every dead black political martyr. And goes, skips all over, just sign, signifier, symbol, and goes to hyper icon. And I think there's a way where that, the use of the black body is material to banner both the process of human progress, right, and also signal the most base interactions of the human or something, give it that slingshot into shareability. Again, that's that dissonance maybe a little bit. I guess TikTok is the other thing I'm thinking about there, in terms of the tools for production. So when I say the means of production, this is also something that I need to sit down and make a list of all those things. But I think I mean and sometimes I call my films parking lot productions, because what I'm able to do is not rent a space, not buy a camera, you know what I mean, but get a bunch of folks together to do something. I think just last night at MoMA, Colleen Smith's work is there as well, but I love Colleen's work because there is that sense of not having a means of production, right? But having almost a pure performance that's captured, and the auteur lies in the ability to capture that performance as it has to happen or can happen. And those are the parking lot productions, this is not to say that it's actually filmed in a parking lot. I'm not, calling people cheap, but you know what I mean? These are versus, I got the opportunity to work with Louis Vuitton last year, and seeing, the way that those, those sessions or those, sites become creative sites, or how they're networked throughout the city, right? It's you don't need to go into a parking lot. There's a list of places that we can shoot for this much, you know what I mean? Having 8 different production companies on one shoot, for instance. That's what I'm talking about with the means of production, and I think it's vast, actually. I think that's a catch-all way of saying control of supply chains, extraction of resources, extraction of labor, distribution of labor, everything. You know what I mean? Even editing with the Louis Vuitton thing. At one point, we were in an editing room where there was they have a tracking software. I think there was probably one of 3 people in the world who could operate this tracking software that can color correct as it tracks moving bodies. That shit was crazy. That's a means of production that I might not have the opportunity to see again. We shot one of those scenes with a Phantom 360 camera that requires this times 10. That requires a roof to hang this camera. And I remember being at the lunch table and kind of being why don't the dancers have any lunch? They had finger sandwiches, and there was a tomato with a ricotta bulb in it. And I remember just looking at this stuffed tomato, and then looking at the scaffolding and being this shit is I don't know where I am. You know what I mean? There's some huge scale issues. You know what I mean? And that's what I mean, the people in those spaces even, you know what I mean? On those big productions, you'll be in a space with people working for free, with people overworking for free, with people who are literally being slaved out, their labor is expected and definitely gonna be free. And you'll be working with people who are paid for appearing, right? Some people get paid for appearing. Let that semantically even sink in, you know what I mean? Some people will be paid more for appearing than doing, right? So those things, that's what I mean by the means of production, right? That Weinstein can be hey, you person that I want to have sex with, I can make you a cultural icon. If you massage my back in a hotel room first, right? Get my dick hard right now, and you might be able to control your own network or constellation of beings. It's power, it's not even a vacuum. It's I don't know, you know what I mean? It's the opposite of a vacuum, where there's no air. Or all air, I don't know. Yeah, wind tunnel. Should I do the online things? Do we have to do all of them?
No, we don't have to do it. I think.
Okay.
Thank you so much for.
Okay.
Thank you for joining online.
Stick
Thank you
around
for
for
being
now,
here.
please. Enjoy this.
And anyone who wants to come back at 4, we'll start
Please,
again.
everybody
Then
come back at 4. Manuel's lecture is going to be so good.
Grab a coffee.